welcome back to my channel. Thank you all for watching and subscribing. I am very happy to have you here. I am giving you a bit of a chatty reading update and also my attempts at a nonfiction lineup for Nonfiction November. I don't want to go into too much of the reasons about why I have a weird relationship to nonfiction. I think the main reason I have a different relationship to it than other people is because I'm a recovering researcher, academic type person, and so I've been immersed with nonfiction of a certain variety, to do with German studies all my whole life. I mean, since I've been in the academy, so to speak. And even today, I was sort of thinking about how, I mean, these past few days, I've been thinking about nonfiction. On my computer, I have probably hundreds of article PDFs saved that I want to get to one day, and they're all of an academic variety, nonfiction. And one thing I noticed just in general is so I teach a 200 level fairy tale class, as some of you know. So these are kids who, a lot of them are first year students, coming in 18 years old, 19, and I don't really ask that much about their reading backgrounds. And my sense is that some of them don't read a lot. Some do. I know that some of them have been reading the Sarah Maas novels. It's all varied. But what I notice is how some of them don't really understand the distinction between fiction and nonfiction. So they call the articles that I have lined up for the class that I force them to read, poor things, but they're good articles, so it's fine, about fairy tales. They call them stories, and I sort of quietly point out that something that's an article or a nonfiction is not a story. And of course, some of the things we read are chapters from books that are nonfiction, but they're not really scholarly. So anyway, nonfiction versus fiction, that whole thing, and how that distinction isn't even clear to some people. But and then more recently, as I've come into YouTube and been sort of exposed to things like Nonfiction November, and have tried to read book length books, like the guy who wrote about the Troubles, and then he wrote about the Empire of Pain. Both of his books they're not bad books, but I just didn't pick them up. I am too busy and they weren't compelling enough, and I have a hard time with book length nonfiction. And I know that Olive would say, well, you haven't found the ones that appeal to you, and that's probably true. And I just, so, it's an ongoing thing. And then one year I remember I tried to start reading. I actually started reading heavy stuff. I started reading Heidegger, the philosopher's big tome, Being and Time, which was sort of interesting, and I liked it. I mean, memories of grad school. But it's so difficult, and it's sort of like learning a new language, and you have to sort of become immersed in Heideggerian, the language. They should offer it on Duolingo, and I just gave up there too. I didn't get very far, but I did find a lot of. So what I tend to do is these rabbit holey things that I do is that I'll fold down things and I'll amass a whole bunch of other things about a subject, and then keep them on my computer. I'm on Notion. And so even my Notion, the whole page is, I have a section on my Notion called Food for Thought. And all it is it's a bunch of links to nonfiction. Look, here's something about Cary Grant. Isn't that amazing? On Cary Grant, Darryl Pinckney, and Whit Stillman, the filmmaker, from the Paris Review. So one of the things, that is full of really good nonfiction, literary, about literature or about cultural stuff. And so, my point here is that, there's so much good stuff out there that's not in book form. And even that I don't really have time to get to. So, but, I keep it diligently piling the things up on my Notion until I go in there and either read them and or get rid of them. And that's just how things are these days, and there's so much when we're inundated with fascinating topics about everything. And I am someone who is interested in a lot of things, but at a pretty superficial level, but mainly because I need to figure out what my real interests are and where I want to dig deeper. But that's okay. I mean, it's just whatever. enough rambling. Let's get into first what I'm still kind of reading, and then I'll talk about nonfiction. So I am still reading this thing that hasn't appeared on my channel for a while, but I am still reading my lovely German book. Sorry, it's kind of beat up, and I'm so sad that I lost the nice cover of it. I'm now on page 290, and I still love it. It's this book by German 19th century novelist Theodor Fontane, who wrote these sort of society novels. They're called society novels. They just have different areas of society, different levels of, and what? Maybe one day I'll give you a bit more of a. This is an overview of what this one's about. I mean, I've talked about it in earlier videos. It's basically he wrote it in the 1870s, looking back to the time just before Napoleon would be vanquished in Prussia in the German-speaking areas. So it's taking place a few months between 18. It says novel from the winter of 1812 to 1813. So it's kind of like, it's quite long, 500 pages of a few months of time. And it really is quite well done. But really all it is, it reminds me a little bit of Zola, other 19th centuries, I guess, is these bunch of people who go and we hang out, and they have little soirees and little get-togethers, and so you dip into this person's house, and he's a bit of a he likes to describe rooms and stuff and buildings, and I like that, and he does it really well. And then he'll describe the people, and I just love the 19th century stuff. I'm just such a sucker for that stuff. And I'm still enjoying it, even though it's as if I'm watching different series, and so they're all incremental, but I'm still reading them in a slow way, and that's just how I am when I'm busy. So that's still going, and then of course Trollop is still going strong. So with this one, I'm not, I'm only on page 194, but it's moving along well enough to keep me engaged, even though I'm moving slowly. And part of the joy of reading the last one of the Basseter is memories of all the other ones. Specifically right now, we're going back to the one before this one. The Small House at Allington is what it was called. And yeah, so everything that was happening in the other ones is kind of coming back into here. And it's fantastic. Trollop's great. I had an insight about one of the many reasons why he's great. And so one thing I think people respond to with him, not just me. So when he's pretty good at almost, it's not exactly it's sort of third person stream of consciousness. So he'll go into, like, this is just an example. A mother is thinking about her daughter and the close relationship that they have, and how she's worried about what's going to happen with that relationship because of other things that have happened in the past and that might happen in the future. And he even says, it made her sad. And he's just very good at sort of the how to put it. So how people's insides can make them sad, because they're thinking about stuff in a certain type of way. I know I'm being vague, but I'm trying to find the quote where it said why it made her sad. And then it goes into sort of, here it is. She could find no comfort anywhere. So something about a letter. Reading the letter was she could find no comfort anyway, the mother. And so the mother, we see the mother's machinations as to, she's thinking what's going to happen. And then it's sort of, as for her own life, desolate as it would be, which is kind of so that's kind of an exaggeration. Her life wouldn't be really desolate, but in her mind it would be, because of what's happening. Mothers know that their daughters will leave them. Even widowed mothers with but one child, blah, 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 are aware that will be left alone. And so, the psychology behind what makes us sad or happy. And he's just so good. I just love him so much. I'm so glad I found Trollop. And then, of course, the big new Audible, which I'm now also having a lovely copy of, Bleak House, which is fantastic, but in a different way, of course. So Bleak House is such a weird novel. I mean, okay, hear me out here. This is really strange, but in a weird kind of way, it reminds me of Recognitions, Gaddis, the big Gaddis book. Yeah, Recognition's not. I mean, it's very different, but because it has a very large cast of characters, and you kind of the camera sort of swoops into one cast of characters, and then it swoops out to another cast of characters, and the cast of characters themselves are eccentric, and sort of there are these set pieces of them interacting with each other in rooms and parties and bars and whatever, establishments of a sort. And the connection between the thread that holds it all together is there, but it's not very strong. So you kind of have this impressionistic feel of just being moved along by, I always sort of think of the movie Slacker. You're just kind of moving along with the great narrative that you're giving yourself over to. And there's just so many characters in here. It's kind of crazy, but and you get sort of connected to certain ones of them right now. This little poor kid, Joe, who's this really poor kid who's become part of the machinations of the bigger plot. And he's like this poor urchin type boy. And, I don't know. And then the other part that I'll have to get into when I find, examples of it. Dickens is really good at the big picture stuff when he'll sort of swoop out and make these declarations about life in general, which I need to read more Balzac, but it's sort of this sort of the big view of things and how things work in general. And it's also vague, I know, but he's very good at that too. And in Bleak House, it seems to be that's what he's doing. He's sort of giving a almost philosophical sort of a description of society's weirdnesses, especially England and London, and then it goes back into these eccentric characters that he's describing, and they're oftentimes very few of his characters are, for lack of a better term, normal. Like in Trollope, you get more or less normal people. And also there are very few people who have common sense in at least as far as I've encountered. They're very narrow-minded, or they're narrow in their outlook and therefore comical, or they're too naively or just super benevolent to the point of being naive about people taking advantage of them. And so there's a lack of middle ground perhaps in Dickens. And then his women characters are always problematic. We know that, granted. I do like Esther still, even though I think she might become a little bit annoying too, but she's the only sort of common sense one. But it's as if she's common sense, but even she needs to sort of step up and call a spade sometimes. There's some people that just need to be called out, and they're never called out. No one calls out this flighty guy who's just takes everyone's money. I forget his name, Skimpole, I think. And of course, as someone who, I just cannot bear that. There's a part of me, maybe a not very likable part. I just hate that. I hate that. I will be the person who calls them out. And maybe would be called something bad, like on TikTok they call them Karens, although hopefully I'm not one of those, but that's a bad thing. Anyway, you can tell it's a nighttime video. It's like late in the day. Anyway, but it's amazing. He's really, really good. And I'm listening to it mainly, but now I'm kind of figuring out where I am, and I'm on page 300, so I'm actually further than the trawler, but that's because it's listening and, it goes quicker. And so that's that. At some point I'll start this one, but I won't even show it to you. Let's get into the nonfiction stuff. So starting with the most kind of sort of niche in a certain sense is a German studies book written by a Stanford German professor who's all of early 40s and has written 6 books, so there's a reason why he's at Stanford, I guess. It's Adrian Dalb, who I know from Twitter, and I was talking to with a colleague at school, and he recommended this book to me called The Dynastic Imagination. I think it's one of his later books. He's a really interesting, he writes all kinds of books, including a book about James Bond music. And another book he wrote, which sort of is indicative of his being at Stanford, is about technology, and it's called What Tech Calls Thinking. And so it's sort of from an academic's perspective about how they think they're hot, but they're not in terms of their ideas, the intellectual stuff of the tech side of things, which, yeah, it's called what tech calls thinking. A lively dismantling of the ideas that come from the intellectual bedrock of Silicon Valley, and I would put intellectual in quotes there. Yeah, because what does it say here? I'm sorry. And often those fancy new ideas are simply old motifs playing dress up in a hoodie. Mm-hmm. Yep. Anyway, this is German studies to a T. The dynastic imagination offers an unexpected account of modern German intellectual history through the frameworks of family and kinship. And a lot of a lot of fiction that I like is centered around depictions of families. Modernity aimed to brush off hierarchical dynasty authority and to make society anew through the mechanisms of marriage, siblinghood, and love. It was, in other words, centered on the nuclear family. And that kind of relates to some of the stuff we talk about in fairy tale class. So the transition of the fairy tale from fireside chit-chat of the adults to what is read to the children in the nursery and sometimes in school. And but as Adrian Daub shows, the dynastic imagination persisted in time, emerging as a critical stance by which the nuclear family's conservatism and temporal limits could be exposed. And so this will take me a while and will be a project. And maybe I will, I think one way to approach it's not that big, but it's dense, would be to read it in chunks, to read it chapter by chapter and take my time. So there's no way I'm going to get through this through Nonfiction November because I want to read other things. Oh, look, it starts out with a quote from The Leopard. That's interesting. Anyway, and I know I've sort of glanced at this opening chapter and pages, and he starts out with Nietzsche, then he goes into Oswald Spengler, if you know who that guy is, and then he goes into Goethe and talks about all kinds of stuff in a very kind of academic way, but also readable, hopefully, for me at least. Yeah, Auguste Comte. I mean, it's just, your basic Goethe, some texts I'm not familiar with by Goethe. So it's an intermingling of cultural and historical and literary, just as we would expect from a Stanford German history, German professor. So I'm excited for this, and I know of who he did his dissertation with. The quote on the back, I know this person. The other quote is Peter Sloterdijk, a philosopher in Germany. So this is niche, but I'm hoping that if I talk about this on my channel, I'll connect it to great works of German literature, for example, Buddenbrooks, or any Thomas Mann. A lot of Thomas Mann is family-centric. Yeah, so Nonfiction November, my style. And of course I've already started this one. It's sort of going very slowly because of time, and I pick when I read at night, I just decide what I want to read. So, but it is going. I'm into where it's talking about her parents, and one thing that's already emerged is how Pa, Lauren Osweiler's father, wasn't as great a guy as she makes him out to be. Now, he's a fully fleshed person, and he had some stuff, he was sort of self-serving in a certain sense, specifically when it came to squatting and things like that. Someone commented, and I apologize, I haven't been good about responding back to all my comments about not knowing anything about Lauren Osweiler. So we're already at 18. I think I'm going to save my how I came to know and love the books to another time. Suffice to say that I'd be interested in to know, I think it has a lot to do where you grow up culturally speaking, and maybe Australia was different from other places because I found out about her. I'll save the Lauren Osweiler chat when I actually start reading them, which will be November, December later on. Moving back to nonfiction. So that was my first two nonfictions, and then the other two are kind of like coffee table books. And so this one, okay, to my shame, I am embarrassed right now to admit I have never read Joseph Campbell, and I teach fairy tales. And so part of the reason, there are many reasons, but I always associated him with kind of New Agey Jungian stuff that I just was not there for. And I'm still not that much there for Jung. But I started looking at this, and it's on our shelves. It's definitely a billboard because I would not have bought this. but my husband Bill. But I like the first quote that he is. So this is his interviews with Moyes, and some of you may even have seen this. And so the first quote here, let me just read it out to you because I really liked it. It's Myth in the Modern World, and it says here, people say that we're all seeking that what we're all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think that what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that our life experiences on a purely physical plane will have resonances with their own innermost being and reality, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. I really like that. I really like that. And so I'm like, maybe I need to be reading this long interview in book form with pictures between him and Moyes. And I liked how it goes on about what is myth. So it's a plan. I don't know. We'll see how much I get into, to be honest. I mean, I do want to do it, but I don't know how far I'll get into it over the month. But tell me your experiences with Campbell, and, did you see this show? Is Moyes? I'm trying to think. I haven't done any research on Moyes. I think they might both be no longer with us. I'm sorry if Moyes still is, and I'm saying he isn't. I apologize. Anyway, so this was one non-fiction pick because I do teach fairy tales, so it's not that far away from me. It's also the whole Iliad thing that I think I've already talked about on here. Yeah, I have. And that's another area where I've already amassed websites, and like there's an online course you can take about mythology that I want to take, because I don't know enough and I want to learn. It's all nonfiction, so we'll see. So the last thing I have here, and I've already kind of started reading a couple of entries. I had this idea of reading it entry by entry, which I still kind of, the obsessive in me kind of still is into that. And it's this beautiful coffee table book called The Encyclopedia of the Middle Ages. And it's got beautiful illustrations all the way through, and it's an encyclopedia. So it starts with A, and just one morning before school, I started reading the first two entries and decided I know nothing, because I really don't. The first entry is the Abadid dynasties, the kingdom founded by Abu al-Qasim Muhammad ibn Abad in Andalusia, the rich province of southern Spain. And so I read about Abadid dynasty, and the next one was Abbasid, which was the actual dynasty of Muslim caliphs that ruled much of the Muslim world. And I know nothing. I know so little about the fact that the Muslims were in Spain. I mean, I did know that, of course, under a less, a definitely non-PC term, they were called the people who came to Spain from Northern Africa. And I thought it was really cool, and I started kind of doing a tiny bit of research into Taifa, the name that they gave their principalities, and that whole thing, the idea that the borders between Africa and Europe were not always, they've never been completely closed. There's always been a lot of, some coming and goings. And then, of course, the next page, it starts with something a little bit more familiar to me, Peter Abela. So Abela and Eloise is the third entry, and I haven't really made it there. But I thought it'd be nice to sort of have this, and I was sort of looking through it a little bit further. They have an entrance on the town of Aachen in Germany, Aix-la-Chapelle, and I've never been to Aachen. Have any of you been to Aachen? I'd like to go to Aachen. I have never been, because it has Charlemagne's connections there, of course. So this would be, and see, then I'm all about alchemy, and that's right there. So this is sort of like an ongoing thing to read for nonfiction. And, I'm a nerdy person, so I love encyclopedias. And actually, one thing, I don't know, I have to look up who Cantor is, but I noticed even in reading the first couple of entries that they were quite well written and succinct in a way that, sometimes you're in luck with a Wikipedia page and it's like great, but sometimes you go there and it won't make sense at all. And it sort of made me sort of nostalgic for the time when we would read these as opposed to go to Wikipedia. So those are my nonfiction picks, and in general, just a little bit of an update. And I'm already at 25 minutes. I'm so sorry. I just can't get these quick ones out. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm going to upload this, and I have a feeling some stationery videos are going to be upcoming. And yeah, let me know what you're all doing and commenting, and I will talk to you pretty soon. Thank you all for watching. Bye bye.